Most Australians find it almost impossible to imagine this reality. But there are places in this country where the mail does not arrive every day or even every week. It arrives just once a month, delivered by plane. There are towns where the closest traffic light sits more than 1,500 kilometers away, and where the single road leading in closes for half the year. In those places, residents do not see that isolation as a flaw. They see it as a feature. These communities are so remote that reaching them becomes a true expedition, requiring permits, planning, and careful preparation. Yet the people who live there are not trapped. They have chosen this way of life deliberately. Many of them say they have found something that people in crowded, connected cities have lost. After speaking with 45 people who either chose this life or inherited it through generations, one truth became clear. Isolation means something very different when it is chosen rather than imposed. Among the 12 most isolated places in Australia, the first is so remote that many Australians do not even know it exists as a town. The journey to understand these communities was not about where they are located. It was about why anyone would stay. The answers reshaped the very idea of what isolation really means. At number 12 on the list is Birdsville, Queensland, a town with roughly 140 permanent residents. It sits 1,590 kilometers west of Brisbane and more than 700 kilometers from the nearest hospital in Mount Isa. Located on the edge of the Simpson Desert, Birdsville rests where the Diamantina River meets red sand dunes beneath an endless sky. Every road leading to the town is unsealed and can remain closed for weeks after rain. Once a year, however, the famous Birdsville races transform this tiny community. The population swells from 140 to more than 7,000 people, proving that thousands believe the journey is worth the effort. A publican couple who left corporate hospitality in Sydney to run the Birdsville Hotel 12 years ago explained that people often ask how they cope with the isolation. They said the real challenge would be coping with crowds, traffic, noise, and seeing strangers every day, something they no longer experience. As one of them put it, this is the least isolated they have ever felt, because everyone knows everyone. Nearby, a third-generation station family expressed the same connection in different words. Their grandfather arrived there, their father is buried there, and they will one day be buried there too. They do not feel stuck, they feel rooted. The price of that commitment is real. Summer temperatures climb beyond 45 degrees Celsius, and when roads close, medical emergencies become life-threatening. Healthcare depends on Royal Flying Doctor Service clinics and satellite phone consultations. At number 11 is William Creek in South Australia, home to approximately 10 permanent residents. 10 people. The town sits on the Yuendumu track, more than 200 kilometers from Kiwirrkurra and over 700 kilometers from the nearest traffic light. It lies beside Anna Creek Station, the largest cattle station in the world, larger than Israel. The unsealed road often closes after rain, and mobile phone coverage is virtually non-existent. The entire town revolves around the William Creek Hotel, which serves as the pub, store, fuel station, accommodation, and community center all in one. The operators, who have run it for 8 years, said they came specifically to run the most remote pub in Australia, and they succeeded. Visitors arrive by flying over Lake Eyre or driving the Yuendumu track to see the landscape. For those who live there, it is simply home. A worker from Anna Creek Station explained that William Creek is considered the metropolis of the region. For them, going to town means coming there, and a population of 10 feels crowded compared to where they normally live. The trade-off is severe. Medical emergencies depend on the Royal Flying Doctor Service and satellite phones, with help hours away. In a town of 10, there is no one else to handle anything. Everyone is the town. Number 10 is Innamincka in South Australia, with a population of roughly 12 to 15 people. It lies 1,500 kilometers north of Adelaide, and more than 500 kilometers from both the nearest traffic light and any hospital. The Sturzeletsky track from the south is unsealed and requires four-wheel drive. When Cooper Creek floods, the town can be cut off for weeks, and there is no mobile phone coverage. The Innamincka Trading Post serves as the only store, accommodation provider, and fuel outlet for hundreds of kilometers. Its operators, who have been there for 10 years, noted that Burke and Wills died in this region because of its remoteness, and in 160 years, not much has changed in terms of distance. What has changed is that people are no longer perishing here. They are living fully, drawn by the birds, the creek, and the silence. A seasonal ranger described this not as isolation, but as privilege. At number 9 is Boulia, Queensland, a town of about 120 people located roughly 1,500 kilometers west of Brisbane and more than 500 kilometers from Mount Isa Hospital and the nearest traffic light. It administers the Diamantina Shire, which is one of the lowest population densities on Earth, about 0.006 people per square kilometer. The Shire is larger than some European countries, and roads regularly close for weeks during flooding. A Shire Council worker who has lived there for 15 years said they came for work but stayed for the lifestyle. In Brisbane, they felt invisible. In Boulia, their work is essential. The local pub acts as the town's living room, where everyone knows everyone else's business, not because it is intrusive, but because everyone looks after each other. The cost of that closeness is a lack of privacy and long periods of isolation during the wet season. At number 8 is Borroloola in the Northern Territory, with around 900 residents. It sits nearly 1,000 kilometers from Darwin and more than 700 kilometers from a major hospital or traffic light. Located in Gulf country near the MacArthur River, the landscape transforms dramatically between dry and wet seasons, and the Carpentaria Highway can be cut off for long periods. An indigenous elder who has lived there his entire life said people from Darwin ask how residents survive there, and Borroloola residents wonder the same about Darwin. For them, the land is home. A fisherman who moved there 20 years ago said he came for the fishing but stayed for the freedom. The wet season isolates the town, limits movement, and tests newcomers, but it also defines life there. Number 7 is Kalumburu in Western Australia, a town of about 460 people and the state's northernmost settlement. It sits more than 550 kilometers from Kununurra and nearly 3,000 kilometers from Perth. The unsealed road into town is only accessible for about 6 months of the year. From November to May, access is only possible by air or sea. Founded as a Benedictine mission in 1908, Kalumburu remains a predominantly indigenous community. Residents say when the road closes, they do not feel trapped, they feel protected. Supplies arrive by barge or plane, and the Royal Flying Doctor Service provides emergency care. A nurse who arrived for 1 year stayed because total isolation changed her priorities. Warburton in Western Australia follows next, with about 550 people living deep in the western desert on Tjuntjuntjara land. It lies more than 500 kilometers from Kalgoorlie and is connected only by rough, corrugated dirt roads. Mobile coverage is nearly non-existent, and internet relies on satellite. The town is a major indigenous art center, with work exhibited internationally. Local artists say the isolation is what they paint: the land, the dreaming, the space. Teachers note that children here possess knowledge no university can teach. The cost of living here is extreme heat, long travel times, and total reliance on limited supplies. Number 5 is Mornington Island, also known as Gununa, in Queensland. It is home to about 1,000 people and sits in the Gulf of Carpentaria, more than 2,000 kilometers from Brisbane. There is no road to the island. None. Access is only by air or sea. It is the traditional land of the Lardil and Kayadil peoples. Flights connect the island to Cairns and Mount Isa, while barges bring supplies seasonally. Elders say most young people leave for education but eventually return, drawn by their sea country. The Royal Flying Doctor Service provides emergency medical care, and children attend school locally until year 10. At number 4 is Yuendumu in the Northern Territory, a Warlbree community of about 750 people, located 290 kilometers northwest of Alice Springs. The Tanami Road connects it to the outside world but can close in the wet season. Yuendumu is one of Australia's most significant indigenous art and language centers. Artists there say their work is created from country, not from cities, and linguists confirm that Warlbree remains one of the strongest indigenous languages in Australia precisely because of this isolation. The town has a clinic, a bilingual school, arts centers, and regular freight deliveries, but life runs on cultural time, not city schedules. And at number 3, Tjuntjuntjara in Western Australia, with a population of about 150, the journey into Australia's most extreme isolation truly begins. Tjuntjuntjara lies more than 650 kilometers from Kalgoorlie, around 1,300 kilometers east of Perth, and more than 650 kilometers from both the nearest hospital and the nearest traffic light. The Innamincka highway from Warburton is not a highway in any normal sense of the word. It is a harsh, deeply remote track that requires high-clearance four-wheel drive vehicles. The route is highly seasonal and can become completely impassable for long periods. There is no mobile phone coverage. Internet access relies entirely on satellite. Mail arrives mainly by air and only occasionally by road. What makes Tjuntjuntjara extraordinary is not just its distance, but its purpose. This community exists because displaced people chose to return to their ancestral lands in one of Australia's harshest environments. Spinifex people were forced off their country in the 1950s when British nuclear tests were carried out at Mornington. For decades, they lived in town camps in Kalgoorlie and Yuendumu, enduring the trauma that displacement brings. Then, in the 1980s, they made the decision to come back, returning to Spinifex country in the Great Victoria Desert, choosing one of the most isolated places in Australia over the damage caused by town camp life. An elder who was part of that return to country explained that the bombs pushed them away from their land. In the town camps, he said, people drank, fought, and died. When they came back to this place that no one else wanted, they found peace again. Their grandchildren are now growing up on country, and that, he said, is why they are there. A Spinifex artist whose work is displayed in major galleries said their art comes from this land. When they were removed from country, almost everything was lost. Now that they paint country again, the stories and spirit of the land have returned to life. Isolation in Tjuntjuntjara protects those stories, but the cost is real. Medical emergencies can be life-threatening, with help possibly a day or more away. Extreme heat and brutal track conditions defeat most vehicles and drivers. This is not a place for anyone without a deep cultural connection to country, for people with medical needs, or for those who cannot endure true remoteness. Tjuntjuntjara stands as one of Australia's most isolated communities, built when displaced people chose their ancestral desert homeland over the trauma of town camp life. At number 2 is Kiwirrkurra in Western Australia, with a population of roughly 150 to 200 people. It is often described as the most remote community in Australia that can still be reached by road, and that reputation is well earned. Kiwirrkurra sits more than 700 kilometers from Alice Springs by desert tracks, around 1,200 kilometers by conventional roads, and more than 2,000 kilometers from Perth. The nearest hospital and the nearest traffic light are each over 700 kilometers away. The Gary Junction Road and the surrounding desert tracks are extremely remote, difficult, four-wheel drive only, and can be completely impassable for months at a time. For much of the year, the community airstrip is the only practical way in or out. The Royal Flying Doctor Service and charter flights are not conveniences here. They are essential infrastructure. There is no mobile phone coverage. Internet access is limited to satellite. Mail arrives by air when conditions allow. Some people living in Kiwirrkurra had no contact with Europeans until 1984. A number of residents remember walking in from the desert as some of the last uncontacted Pintupi people on Earth. They chose to establish their community here in the Gibson Desert near Lake Mackay, on traditional country, despite the extreme isolation. Art created in Kiwirrkurra is sold in galleries in Melbourne, New York, and London, yet the artists refuse to move. A senior elder who walked in from the desert as a young person recalled a time with no buildings, no cars, and no white people. Today there are houses and a clinic, but the country remains the same. They live between two worlds, but it is country that keeps them Pintupi. An art center coordinator explained that everything that makes the art meaningful comes from being there. Isolation is not a limitation. It is the entire reason the art exists. The cost of life in Kiwirrkurra is extreme. It may be the most isolated mainland community in Australia by road, with real risks of life-threatening emergencies, brutal desert conditions, and supplies that usually arrive by air because road access is rare. Anyone without a Pintupi cultural connection, anyone with serious medical needs, and anyone unable to handle ultimate isolation would not survive here. For those who returned, however, coming home to country was worth every hardship. At number 1 are the Cocos Islands, home to about 600 people across 2 inhabited islands. This ranks as Australia's most isolated community for a simple reason: distance. Perth, the nearest Australian city, is 2,750 kilometers away. The nearest hospital is also 2,750 kilometers away and requires air evacuation. The nearest traffic light is the same distance. Canberra sits 3,685 kilometers away. There is no road, and there will never be one. You cannot drive to the Cocos Islands. Ever. They are a coral atoll floating in the Indian Ocean, made up of 27 islands forming a lagoon of turquoise water in every direction. Flights to Perth take about 4 hours and operate several times a week when services are running. They are the only realistic connection to mainland Australia. The community itself is unique. Cocos Malay people, whose ancestors were brought by the Clunies-Ross family in the 1800s, maintain a culture, language, and identity found nowhere else on Earth. Alongside them is a small Australian administrative population. A fourth-generation Cocos Malay resident said her family has lived there for generations. When people ask why she lives 2,750 kilometers from anywhere, she asks why anyone chooses cities where they cannot see the ocean from their home, cannot catch dinner from a boat, and do not know their neighbors. She said they are not isolated, they are protected, and they are home. An Australian government worker who extended a 2-year posting to 10 years said she came for work and stayed for the way of life. The mainland now feels chaotic, with traffic, stress, and neighbors who do not know each other. On the islands, everyone is known, and the lagoon is her backyard. A young Cocos Malay person who left for high school, university, and a good job in Perth eventually returned. Others thought the decision was crazy, but they felt lonelier among millions in the city than they ever did among 600 on the islands. The lagoon kept calling, and they answered. The trade-offs are unavoidable. Oceanic isolation is real. Medical emergencies require evacuation when the weather allows. Everything costs more. Educational opportunities beyond a certain level require children to leave. Anyone with serious medical conditions, anyone who needs constant stimulation, or anyone whose career depends on the mainland would struggle here. Together, these 12 Australian communities represent something increasingly rare in the modern world: genuine, deliberate isolation. This is not lifestyle isolation where the city is an hour away. This is not digital isolation where people still post online. This is the kind of remoteness where the nearest traffic light is 700 kilometers away, where mail arrives monthly, where roads close for half the year, and where medical emergencies depend on flying doctors and weather. And in every case, people are choosing it. They are trading medical certainty for landscape, convenience for community, and endless options for deeper meaning. They live farther from shopping centers, noise, and crowds than most people can imagine, and they would not change it. Perhaps that says something about what many of us have lost in crowded, connected lives. Maybe some people now live in a different kind of isolation, surrounded by millions, yet disconnected from what truly matters. If you made it this far, subscribe for more stories about how Australians really live beyond the mainstream narrative. Share which place surprised you the most, and whether you would ever consider living there. And if this story made you question the conventional path, liking this video helps others find it too.